It's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Professor Timothy Walsh. He's been a great friend of the British Society for Antimicrobial Chemotherapy, which, if you haven't heard, has free membership. So go to the website and sign up. But he's been a big friend of BSAC for several years. But more importantly than that, he's a professor of microbiology at the University of Oxford, where he's the director of biology for the Ineos Institute for antimicrobial research. Key highlights in his career include the discovery of New Delhi metallo-beta-lactamase type 1 and also the mobile colistin resistance gene, MCR gene. And you'll find all of this in his page on Wikipedia, which is well worth reading. But what he doesn't say is that he's a rhythm guitarist, or used to be a rhythm guitarist in a band called The Fish That John West Rejects. So over to you, rock star microbiologist Tim Walsh.
If only. Thank you, David. So I'm hopefully going to go through this talk very quickly and take about half an hour. At the end of the talk, I'm going to show you a video that we've created. It's an anime on antimicrobial resistance, but we don't call it antimicrobial resistance deliberately, and I'll come back on to that point later. I don't really have any conflicts of interest or declarations to disclose, really. I do have an honorary chair at the China University of Agriculture, and I'm also a director of Barnard's, and I'll come on to that in a minute in terms of a lot of the work that we do in low middle-income countries and the language around that. The title I was given was really sort of to follow on from yesterday's lecture, and that is to sort of look around the whole communication with the public and politicians on pre and post the UNGA meeting, where David actually was in the room in New York and I was sitting outside of the room. We got a little flicker going on with the presentation, but hopefully that won't interfere with the talk too much. So one of the things that I try to work out, as most academics do, is the thing about being an academic is you have the freedom to think. The bad news is a lot of what you think can be utter rubbish, but hopefully this isn't utter rubbish. And I try to work out sort of the enormity of the problem that we have in terms of the challenges. And one of the problems that we have with antimicrobial resistance is fundamentally it's to do with the bacteria. You know, we can talk about the economics of it, we can talk about Walsh, we can talk about diagnostics, we can talk about lots of things around AMR, but AMR really starts with ARG, antimicrobial resistant genes. And I'd roughly try to work out exactly how many ARGs there are in the human population, and I try to work out exactly roughly the carriage in human gut, the carriage in chickens, flies, etc. And if you, by the way, think that chickens are a problem, they are not really the problem in terms of greenhouse emissions. Shellfish and fish are far worse than chickens. So in terms of food biosafety, chickens, it looks like, will be the way in which we will go in terms of the 21st century. There's also faith issues around eating chickens rather than eating pork, etc. The thing about bacteria is that they're very adaptive, they're very plastic, and have a great deal of fluidity in their DNA. And they're able to adapt and respond very, very quickly to environmental stimulus, and that includes antibiotics. And the thing about gram-negatives, and particularly Enterobacteriaceae, as we used to call them, they can exchange their plasmids very, very quickly at very alarming frequencies. And as I mentioned yesterday in the talk that we gave, our understanding of plasmid biology is very embryonic, but we're now using good technology and new tools to understand a lot better just how widespread these plasmids are throughout bacterial populations in the environment as well as the human gut. The other challenges that we have are very much outside of the bacteria. And this is basically the impact on humanity, that essentially we're going to lose roughly 1.5 million people a year, and that is due to AMR, that's not due to lack of antibiotic access. The predictions by the Graham report is that we will lose roughly 40 million people by 2050, and I'll come on to comparing conflict, human conflict with AMR at the end of my talk. We roughly lose somewhere in the order of approximately 18 years of life if AMR will become a problem and antibiotics cease to work. And by 2035, AMR is projected to cause us something in the order of over 400 billion US dollars annually, and it has a huge impact on the workforce as well. And so there is a huge economic burden as well as a sort of a clinical burden, if you like. Now, when we talk about tackling AMR or the problems around AMR, a lot of us will kind of sort of bring up these things. What is more important? Is it diagnostics? Is it infection control? Is it antibiotic access? Or is it actually we should put all our money and resources into developing new antibiotics? But you can rearrange these circles as you want on the line, but I think this is a reasonable place to be, where novel antibiotics or new antibiotics, for example, a lot of the good work done by GARD-P and CARB-X, etc., deal with the back end of the problem. But we've got to deal with the front end of the problem. Often as not, we now talk about this concept called One Health, and One Health is fine and good, but actually a lot of us are now starting to question the terminology around One Health and what One Health means, and is it a distraction from actually what happens within our hospitals? Are we diverting resources and sort of effort, if you like, into actually where the clinical problem is? I do a lot of work in farms now with collaborations in China, and absolutely antibiotic use in animals is huge, and we've got to address it. But actually, this sort of all impacts on humanity, and I think the battleground for me, a lot of this is within hospitals. Diagnostics have been poorly done for many, many decades, and now there's a lot of sort of interest in diagnostics and how we make diagnostics affordable, particularly in low-income countries, and I'll come onto that point in a minute. So I just want to quickly go through a few slides with you and just tell you a little bit about a program which we call Barnard. And there are other studies, for example, like ACORN, that have looked at the burden of AMR across many, many countries. And in fact, speaking to both Paul and Roger, it looks like, with ACORN, they also have a large neonatal component. But we specifically focused on neonates and tried to understand what the issues are around actually developing diagnostics and antibiotic access around neonates. But importantly, we try to understand the economics around this, exactly what is going on in these countries and what we need to do to address the problem. So I'm just going to show you some slides now, very pictorial, of where we work and why we work. This is Lady Reading Hospital, and this is in Peshawar, in Pakistan, and this is one of the poorest regions in Pakistan. And as you can see, you have kind of lots of patients sort of queue up, and in fact we have hundreds of babies, newborn babies, admitted, not born in the hospital, but admitted to the hospital. Why is this hospital so busy? It's because it serves the lowest socio-economic group within that particular region in Peshawar. And therefore the mortality is very, very high, something in the order of about 40% with admitted babies. So it's a big problem. The graph on the left shows you the inflation in Pakistan, and that is now up to about 20%. So when you try to understand what you want to do in these countries or how you actually support hospitals and diagnostics, you've got to take into account the economics. In the UK, we think a few percent inflation is a bit disastrous. But in a lot of these countries, the inflation is north of 20%, and that impacts massively on what you can do and what people can afford. These are just, now we're moving down into Karachi, actually, and you can see that this is rather typical of what we would see in terms of diagnostics, where they try and put on as many discs on the plate as possible, and this just gives you some idea of the laboratory capacity. The good news is, in collaboration with the WHO, and a big shout out to the WHO, this was the laboratory in Karachi. This is at the NICH, National Institute of Child Health, in Karachi, and this is now what it looks like after. I just would like to say with Karachi, the NICH, is that it's a 1,000-bed hospital, and the NICU is 100 beds. And so it's absolutely huge. Do they have diagnostics there? No, not until we arrived. And so what happened was that actually the diagnostics went outside the hospital to private labs, and that basically meant that only a certain amount of the population could afford the diagnostics. We're now moving into northern Nigeria. This is the Muhammad Murtala Specialist Hospital, state hospital, and it's state funded. And that's important to understand because in Nigeria they have 3 health systems: federal, state, and local. 90% of the population go to the state hospitals, not the federal ones, because to go to the federal ones, you need money. And for example, to admit your baby into, for example, AKTH, which is next door to this hospital, you need to pay something like 45,000 Nigerian naira, okay? And a lot of the people simply cannot afford that. And so that's why a lot of the people go to this hospital. The mothers, by 9 o'clock in the morning, there will be a queue of between 400 and 500 mothers waiting to admit their baby. And how big is the maternity or the NICU? It's 20 bed. That means that a lot of people are turned away. What happens to those babies, we don't understand, so we're trying to understand exactly the impact of kind of non-admission on the outcome of those babies. And of course, a lot of them perish. So, on the right, this is our plan, and this is what we want to build in terms of a laboratory. And at the bottom of that, the laboratory will be on the top, and at the bottom of that will be a new NICU. How much does this cost? It costs roughly 50 to 60,000 US dollars, so it's really, really good value for money. So anyway, this is the hospital build. This was taken last week when I was in Nigeria. And this will be, part of this will be an extended NICU to double the bed capacity. And this is the new lab at the top. What I'm showing you here is basically the US dollar against the naira. And you can see that basically since 2000, this year, or over a period of a year, that actually the naira has lost a lot of its value against the US dollar and against the UK pound. And that basically means that when you start to build capacity there, the raw materials cost so much more than what they did before. They've gone up by about 70-fold. So actually understanding the local economics of a particular country and what you can do and the impact of that in terms of capacity building and also diagnostics is really, really important. Now we move to, this is DMCH, that's Dhaka Medical College Hospital, and this is in the capital of Bangladesh. This was what the room looked like before, and so we built a research center there. How much did it cost? It cost something in the order of about 30,000 US dollars, including a laboratory. So a research office and a laboratory in terms of managing sepsis in neonates. So this is again, the US dollar versus the Bangladeshi taka. And you can see that actually the taka has lost a massive amount of its value since June, July. What happened in June, July? Most of you in the room will know that actually the government in Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina's government, got overthrown. And it was very interesting looking at the British press because they were very much anti-Sheikh Hasina because they thought that she was sort of too strong, etc., and suppressing the opposition. But actually, you can see that when you remove a government forcibly from power, this is the impact that it makes. And Bangladesh is still in a bit of a mess economically. And again, that impacts hugely on the local population and what the local population can afford. This now we move to northern Ethiopia, Dessie. This hospital, by the way, was ransacked about 2 years ago, completely and utterly decimated. Militants came in and stripped everything out and sold everything onto the black market. And this lady here, Fatima, she's absolutely amazing and single-handedly built up the NICU and the maternity unit. And you can see here that we have inflation in Ethiopia, something in the order of 30–40%. And so that, again, impacts hugely on what we're able to do, and particularly what local Ethiopians can afford. The other problem that we have in Ethiopia in particular, but also in other countries, is the lack of basic facilities. And the one thing that we know about AMR, we know what the solutions are. We know what the solutions are. You know, with those circles that I put up at the beginning, those are the things that we need to address, as well as the broader One Health issues on antibiotic use in animals, etc. But also basic things like WASH. This here is the labor ward. This is the toilet in the labour ward where pregnant mothers have to go and wash themselves. And this is the sort of the ceiling that's sort of falling down in the labour ward. It doesn't take much to fix it. And in Ethiopia, all water is brought into the hospital in buckets. Okay, there is no running water in any public hospitals in Ethiopia. It's a huge, huge problem. And this now, we move now onto the west coast into Sierra Leone, where you can see we have very similar sort of situations. And so that we know what the issues are, and they're very basic issues to fix. And so this kind of brings me on to this series of articles that were published in the summer, a very good series of articles in The Lancet, where they basically looked at the impact of averting AMR, and you can see that they basically broke up low middle income countries into low income, low middle income, and upper middle income, and WASH was one of the major things that will reduce AMR in a lot of these countries. So again, we know what the solutions are, but maybe there is, as my friend Michael Corley would say, there is a lack of imagination and a lack of belief in fixing them. So economic modeling is very, very important, and these are some of the things that we are trying to address, and there was an excellent article written on this about the whole issues around the economics and trying to understand and address the economics, particularly in low-income countries. And, you know, we just simply ask the question, what is the mitigation of economic burden in LMICs with treatment and particularly diagnosis of sepsis? You know, and if we start with the basics, which is sepsis, and try and get that right, then we can move on to other issues like upper respiratory tracts and UTIs. So, in terms of political engagement, and I'm certainly not a politician for those people who know me well, but one of the things that we started to do in mid-2023, all the way to a few months ago, up to the high-level meeting that was in New York, is we started to meet various leaders around the world, and we started to simply ask them what they want from the UN high-level meeting. So this is really my team. This is Kenneth Irugbu and Chioma Aki, and this is Dr. Ali Pati, who's the Minister of Health in Nigeria, and obviously this is myself. And we simply wanted to understand what are the issues in Nigeria. I met him again last week in Abuja, and we sort of followed up that conversation about accessing global funding to actually address some of the issues in Nigeria. Over to the right here, we have Michael Corley, a very good friend of mine from BSAC, obviously myself, Yuqing Zhou, who deserves a huge mention, her and Dongming. These Dongming and her are from the Chinese embassy in the UK. And one of the things that was really amazing was the fact we were one of the few people to go and meet the Chinese embassy people. The Chinese ambassador has been banned from entering UK Parliament. So therefore, we decided to go and meet them outside to actually try and understand what their issues were and where China sits in this. I've been into lots of governmental meetings with people like Tim, for example, in CDO meetings, and it's really interesting. Nobody talks about China. It's a taboo subject. And yet China produces 60% of the world's antibiotics in animals, roughly 49% of the antibiotics we use globally, and actually is making huge advancements in diagnostics with amazing technology. And so we have to actually start talking to China, if not actually start working with China. And in the United Kingdom, we actually haven't signed the Memorandum of Understanding with China just on broad aspects of health. Other countries have, for example, like Denmark, but in the UK, we have still yet to do this. So there is a lot of bridge building to do with respect to kind of global partnerships. So I wasn't there for this particular meeting. This meeting was a year ago on vaccines, and this was obviously in September 2023. But there was I was talking to Tim, I think yesterday or the day before, and we were talking about there was a lot of unhappiness, let's just call it that, about this particular meeting. And so there was a lot of work to do to build up with low-income countries or developing countries about trying to have broad partnerships and trying to get everybody on board with this particular UN meeting. This kind of brings me on to my next issue, which is communication. Now we've started to use terms like global south and global north. Now, I'm from Tasmania, and you can't get any more south than that. It's right at the bottom of the planet. If you don't know where Tasmania is, it's right, the little island on the bottom. I'm global south, and yet I represent global north. You know, and so when we sort of start talking about global south, global north, all you're doing is dividing the world into two sectors. You know, and since when have dividing the world into two sectors ever solved anything? In my opinion, it hasn't. And then we started to use this term in terms of a visionary aspiration, North Star. Well, North Star can only be seen by half the planet, those in the Northern Hemisphere. So, again, that is actually quite divisive and actually not very helpful. So the way in which we use language has to improve to be more inclusive if we are really, really going to work together. So this is kind of the run-up to the UN high-level meeting, and there were lots of drafts, and it was, for those who don't know, it was co-facilitated and co-coordinated both by Barbados and Malta, and there were various drafts, and then we went into September where there was this signing of the agreed declaration. One of the things that I wanted to do, and I help organize and run a course in Annecy in France with Foundation Myria, who are absolutely brilliant at organizing this course. And we have nearly everybody in that room is from low-income countries. And I wanted to ask them what they wanted from the UN meeting. And you can see here that the highest one was, in fact, actually diagnostic access and infrastructure support. And, you know, if we can start solving those, and we can start thinking about how we actually deliver cost-effective antibiotics. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of pamphlets, there's a lot of websites that talked about the UN meeting, and this is essentially the targets, the so-called targets that have been put forward. You know, we can talk about those all day, every day, whether we agree with them or not. But the problem is, as soon as you put forward a target, they become very difficult to work towards. This was an article that was written by Danilo Wong and colleagues, and this is kind of the fall for targets in the fact that they're actually quite good because they sort of focus the mind. But actually, targets are not always a good thing, because actually what you land up doing is piling a lot of pressure onto countries, and what happens if they don't make those targets? How are they going to be funded to make those targets? How are you going to assess progress in making those targets? And I've just put this slide up really to show you that actually targets can work. And this essentially is a review on the MRSA reduction in the UK that happened way back in the 1990s. MRSA in the UK was extremely high. It was something in the order of about 40–45% in our hospitals. And so there are a few things that happened. First of all, the government stepped in and provided money. And they said, if you reduce MRSA rates in your hospital by X amount, we will give you more money. And they provided money for good infection control practice. But also, we were publishing them in UK papers. So in the broadsheets in the United Kingdom, if you wanted to find out if your local hospital had high MRSA rates, you would go and read the Daily Mail or the Telegraph. They were there in black and white. The good ones, the bad ones. And that level of transparency put a huge amount of pressure on the hospitals, but also the governments. And so there were this sort of systematic approach going on in the UK as to how to address this in a stepwise fashion, as you can see here. And it actually worked really, really well, and MRSA sort of fell away. If I asked a colleague of mine, was it really successful, he would say MRSA got bored and went away anyway. But actually, I also think Farges actually played a big part in this, as well as IPC. So I owe, with thanks, grateful thanks, these next series of slides to Sabia. And she's basically sort of brought out this discussion, which I completely agree with, about targets versus continuous quality improvement. And I think rather than just having targets, what we should do is to work individually with each country to see how we can actually help them and provide funding to improve some of the indices that we have in those countries that make it very specific, going back to the whole case in Ethiopia about providing a water supply. And so this is really important. And basically, she's called this the footprint. And this is the footprint. Some of us have large steps, some of us have small steps, but actually, I think to work individually with countries and to look at where they are and to provide the funding and in a stepwise fashion to improve this, because every country is very different. To provide broad targets by 2030, you know which countries are going to actually be able to fund their national action programs and get there, and you know which countries will not. And so this doesn't place any pressure on countries. It's simply working with the countries at an individual basis. This was the high-level meeting, for those of you who don't know what it looks like. And these photographs were kindly sent to me by my colleagues in ICARS, and Dame Sally, and also David as well. This is Mia Motley, who's a very strong politician and not to be messed with. This is David Lammy, who's our now Secretary of Health, who is to be messed with. And this here is Tedros, obviously, General Director of the WHO. One of the things that was very different about this meeting was that we had a musical at the end of this meeting. And it was by a Scottish group. And the lead guitarist here, and actually the songwriter, the guy on the right here, his name is Robin. They produced a musical on the life of Alexander Fleming, but also the discovery of benzoyl penicillin. And they ended this particular session with, I think the song is called I've Done All That I Can. And it speaks about antibiotics in the water and antibiotics in the soil. And it was a very creative way of getting through the message of the fact that actually we're polluting our planet and we need to step up and do something about it. It was originally called, Lifeline was originally called Mold, which a lot of us thought was actually a really, really good title, and then they changed it to Lifeline. But nonetheless, it's on Spotify, so go and listen to it, and the songs are really, really good. The problem that we had when in September was that we were fighting against other stories that were going on. And so essentially, basically, and I'm being apolitical here, completely and utterly apolitical, just before the meeting, the IDF basically set off the bombs in the walkie-talkies and the pagers in Hezbollah, and that actually dominated the news. And then straight after that, then you had Iran, for example, firing in missiles. And so we were sort of wedged between what was happening in the Middle East. And therefore, nobody really talked about AMR or the UNGA meeting, apart from people like us. It didn't get the traction that it needed. Also, as you well know, today, the results are starting to come through from the US election. That was really, and you notice I put Donald Trump on the right-hand side of Kamala Harris for obvious reasons, but we were kind of drowned out, really, of what was happening in the US election. And so, this is one of the problems that we have with antimicrobial resistance. We have this slow tsunami starting, we know the impact of it, but actually we're drowned out constantly by other world events in terms of what will happen. So there is now the meeting going on in Jeddah very soon. I certainly won't be there, and these slides were kindly sent forward to me by Michael Corley from BSAC. And essentially, there's going to be breakout sessions or sandpit sessions, which I'm actually really think is going to be very interested when you have ministers of health having sandpit sessions, to talk about things like capacity development, stewardship and surveillance and access. And this is to look at how the national action programs that have been agreed in the declaration can be funded. This now goes back to Sabia's slides about how we can fund these. And I think that we have to make, again, these funding opportunities tailor-made for each particular country and also for regions. Regions are very important. For example, in Abuja in Nigeria is a very rich capital city. And as soon as you go outside of Abuja into the north of Nigeria, into Kano, it's incredibly poor. And you're talking about income of about a fifth in Kano compared with Abuja. So thinking about this at a regional level is really important. So my final set of slides are really a different type of arms race. And Sue and I were talking about this morning over breakfast. She presented some really interesting data on about the conflict and how conflict actually undermines a lot of what we do in terms of health, but also in terms of AMR. And I've just put the question there, does it make any sense? So this is a slide just showing the amount of money that we spend per year on arms. And it's something in the order of about 2.4 trillion US dollars. It's a vast amount of money, and my country there sits at number 6, the United Kingdom. This is the number of deaths in armed conflicts. Now, we've got to be really careful about this data and how we look at this data and how we assess this data. But the reason why we have a blip here in 93, 94 is because 2 reasons. Number one, this was the dismantling of former Yugoslavia with Kosovo and Bosnia, etc. But also, if those of you remember, we also had the Rwandan genocide as well that involved neighboring countries like Uganda. And so, yeah, unfortunately, this has sort of blipped a little bit here, probably due to what is going on in the Middle East. But nonetheless, the numbers are not enormous when you compare this to AMR, where AMR will wipe out virtually in a year what has happened over the last 35, 40 years. And so this is kind of what we know, 1.4 million deaths attributable, and this basically came from, these figures came from this particular article here, and we can break this down into a country commitment to funding AMR. You'll see that AMR is roughly hovering around 2 billion US dollars in terms of investment year in, year out. So conflict actually causes an increase in the breakdown of infrastructure and political dismantling. Stability, political stability. And here I've just shown a picture in Gaza, which Sue and I spoke about yesterday, and I spoke to Hanan Balki about 2 weeks ago, and she was telling me the horrible plight of what's going on in Gaza. And this, in the top right-hand corner, is Ukraine, a hospital that was bombed in Ukraine. And so it doesn't actually matter where you are, conflict causes this disruption. This is the UN goals for those Sustainable Development Goals, and I think AMR cuts across all of those. And one of the things I would like to see is actually AMR having its own SDG, because I think it is important enough. So this is, I'm going to leave you now. Hopefully this will work. I'm hoping it will work as he looks at the sound desk. So this is a video that we made, which is an anime film. And whilst we're sorting it out, I will just tell you a little bit about it. We wanted to try and reach teenage populations or the younger populations. Anyway, enjoy. And this is my final slide.
How's the studying going?
Yeah, I've been working on COVID and pandemics, and now learning about antibiotic Armageddon.
Antibiotic what?
Antibiotic Armageddon? Basically, we're going to run out of antibiotics very soon.
Antibiotics are like those drugs that get rid of infections, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Bacteria that can cause infections are increasingly resistant to all antibiotics. Some call these superbugs. We've been using these precious medicines like sweets in humans and animals.
Did somebody say superbug?
Ethan, really?
This antibiotic thing Marley was talking about does sound really disturbing.
Exactly. Just like climate change, none of us will escape this.
Ooh, really? Yet another scare story?
Listen. By 2050, it is predicted we will be back to the Dark Ages, where medicines we relied upon for so long won't be there.
2050? Who cares about 2050? This is now.
That means if you fall off your beloved motorbike, you too may have an untreatable infection and possibly die. By 2050, well over 10 million a year will die of antibiotic-resistant infections. It is way worse than COVID. It is happening right now in countries across the world. We don't have until 2050.
Come on, Marley. We're young and fit. What could go wrong?
Can't believe it. That he died like this? A simple bike accident, minor surgery, and then being eaten by an incurable infection.
We all knew it was going to happen to one of us. It was just a matter of time. We are the lucky ones. Dozens have died in my hospitals from the same drug-resistant bacteria.
You kept on warning us about antibiotic Armageddon.
How did we get this so wrong?
Good question. The evidence was all there 10 years ago, but nobody listened.
And, as usual, we were far too late.
This is just the beginning. And by 2050, it will be worse. Much worse.
Okay, there we are. So I've got 7 minutes left, so we've got some time for questions, but I wanted just to justify my madness in making that. And all my children watched anime, and so we thought, why not do something with anime? Notice we didn't talk about AMR in this. We talked about drug-resistant infections. We talked about antibiotic Armageddon. We wanted to keep the language simple. And also, we just kind of wanted to build up characters in this. And this was actually funded by a UK Chinese grant through UKRI. And there is a funny story to this, that actually the company in China, Zoland, were absolutely amazing. The way they did the anime, it's the highest resolution that you can get in terms of quality of film. And we were hoping to show this in Chinese cinemas as trailers. But because the guy was riding a motorbike and had red hair, we weren't allowed to. And there was a bar scene, we weren't allowed to. The good news is that UKRI have given us money to put this into UK schools as part of an education package, and we're going to basically make the subtitles into French, Italian, Spanish, Turkish, and maybe Arabic, and a whole series of languages to try and make this universal. It's completely free. You've got the web link, I think, there. Just go and click on. And also the web pages that we've made are very, very light touch that will hopefully appeal to young people. We don't want to tell young people what to do. If you want to upset my children, tell them what to do. What you've got to do is to show them the problem and enable them then to go away and to fix the solutions. This will impact their population, their generation, far more than it will me. I'm going to be dead in 20 years' time, or 25 years' time, but my children and my children's children will bear the burden of what we are now doing in the 21st century. So anyway, this is to say thank you in all the languages in the countries where we work, and I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was a really impressive presentation.
All right, thank you.